This is Indie Fireside, and we are reviewing Game Dev Tycoon.
There it is. Game Dev Tycoon. So, are we going to talk about the good stuff first?
Yes, as always, we will always talk about the good things of the game before the bad things. So, as always, I will pass it off to other people to say what they want to say first, and I'm going to give Zach a break because Josh is here, and I'm going to make Josh say first, what are the good things about this game?
Yes, this was my pick for this week as we go around the IGR staff. I think next week is going to be Ian, or next month I should say, is going to be Ian. But, so, first of all, Tycoon games... in adventure games that people are always like, oh, adventure games are dying. I feel like sometimes Tycoon games have been dying, and I think that's mostly because, or at least it seems that way, mostly because there's a lot of bad Tycoon games, a lot of copycats, no one's innovating, things like that. Where Game Dev Tycoon has done it well, and they are doing it in their own way. Obviously, there's that Tycoon formula of starting from the bottom, now we're here, Drake style thing going on, but they take it in with their own mechanics where when you're starting off, you're making these games in your garage. You have to do they have different stats that it's not a whole lot of resource management, at least not in the beginning, because you're basically just making these games using your limited creativity, because there's not a whole lot of openness other than putting together, kind of like plugging in different things, like genre type of game or the engine that you want to use, that sort of stuff, and then you get to name the game. But you're plugging these things together, and then as you go throughout it, the bubbles for like research and technology pop up, and then the bugs and stuff like that. So it's very simplified, especially in the beginning, but at the same time, it opens it up to a large amount of depth, especially as you go on. And I think they did that well as far as differentiating themselves from other Tycoon games. They're not copying anyone necessarily, at least not, code for code, basically. But at the same time, it's still like, you play the game, you're like, yep, this is definitely Tycoon. So that's the first thing I would say is they've done very well.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Zach?
Yep. And Zach?
I feel like so part of the game is you sort of trace out the history of, I guess, the gaming industry from the early 80s or thereabouts, I think. And
I think probably 70s is
late 70s.
Well, it starts with like the
70s,
Commodore and what's the competitor in that game? They use all like off-brand so as not to get sued.
Right,
but,
right.
Is it basically the Commodore and what the original? What was it?
I think the original. You start out with only a Commodore, right?
No, I think there's two options.
There's like an Atari. There's an Atari that goes obsolete pretty quick, I think.
Well, no, it's two PCs, I think, because you don't get the first console you get, I think, is the NES, or the comparable version of the NES in the game.
Well, I mean, the NES comes much later, but I mean, first, obviously, you're gonna develop for the Commodore. In the early stages of the game, and I think the competitor, I don't know, it seems to me like it's like an Atari or something. It's
it seemed
a
PC.
Big 20. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
Big 20 was a PC, but that's probably predates.
PC predates Atari, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you're right. Commodore and then a PC, and then of some sort, and then. But they do a good job of another thing. They do a good job of is kind of. You can tell that they appreciate the history of game dev as game devs themselves, and taking it pretty accurately through the ebbs and flows of gaming. And before
Right.
before we started recording, we had a heated debate about consoles and PCs and stuff like that. But they go through
Sure.
the they appreciate all forms of it, and including the consoles and PCs. And in the beginning,
Well, let's get Zach's statement.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean,
yeah.
basically, it was just I thought that was, I guess, kind of like a nice bonus was going through that kind of memory lane thing, showing a little bit of tying it into history and reality a little bit. I kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of that history too is the fact. I mean that most games back then did start in people's garages or basements or wherever.
True.
Even just building PCs in general. I mean, that's where Mac started.
Most of the time in living rooms.
Yeah.
Especially in the 80s. Countless games were started in people's living rooms.
And but I was part of that history is like the ebbs and flows of the industry and how the Commodore was very, very huge and successful and promising, and then it bust really quickly, as you were saying, Vance. It went downhill really quickly to the PC and eventually consoles like the NES and things like that, and the Atari and all that. So I thought that was really cool. The fact that they're showing love for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so what I would say is kind of the same thing, is that I, of course, loved the history that was in this game. I think that it wasn't a particularly accurate history, but that's a negative thing. I'm talking about positive things. So there was a nostalgia that grabs you in this game. If you're someone who lived through that era, then you're going to say, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that."
But they don't lean too heavily on the nostalgia either. I mean,
they don't. You're right.
Yeah, they don't.
It's just kind of
which is nice because a lot of games nowadays, especially indies, tend to lean on that nostalgia. Like, oh look, our game's in the the 8-bit style or 32-bit style or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's got this chiptune music in it. But the nostalgia is just really kind of a secondary
sort of. Yeah, it's like it's not even, it's in no way like part of the mechanics or aesthetic.
It's just it's more of a result of the concept, not necessarily something that was intentionally built in, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but as far as good things are concerned, I think that the fact that you feel like you have a lot of freedom to decide how to progress. You can research the things that you want to do and try to make the company that you want to make, I think, is a really good concept. And the graphics are very nice. I think probably
it's kind of calming,
as
really.
As a person who is not a graphics aficionado, I really liked the graphics. I think that they really set the tone for the game. They made something that if you had I think a different graphical tone, it would be a very different game. I think the graphical tone of this game is quite defining.
It was a really relaxing aesthetic, I thought.
Yeah.
As you're playing, and it was easy to just kind of sit there, and get sucked in. And part of it is a little bit of the addictive quality to it, but because it's just relaxing, you're just kind of going by. It's very low stress, and you can just kind of relax and do what you need to do. Another thing that I thought was really cool, or really well done, was as you go on was the resource management part of it. By resources, it's more about your time and energy spent on various projects, because eventually, in the game you can upgrade to actually get an office, employees, and things like that. You build your own. You have the choices to contract out.
Well, you only have 3 upgrade options to get to the top office.
There's so you can get the you have to decide what you're going to spend your time on, between making new engines or contract work, or making new games, training your employees, all that sort of stuff. So even though there's not a whole lot of resources per se, but it does a good job in forcing you to make those decisions with what you do need to divvy out, I guess.
And I think something that they did a little bit on the sly, maybe, is put famous game developers into it. And maybe I got lucky in this regard, but I got Roy Trubshaw on my development team. In the game, his name was different. It was like Leroy Rubshaw or something. But they have, like, you can get famous developers, and I'm a really big fan of Roy Trubshaw.
I'm pretty sure I got a version of Tim Schafer once.
Really?
I think so.
I'm a much bigger fan of Roy Trubshaw than I am of Tim Schafer. Roy Trubshaw basically created my interest in games. That guy is amazing, and the fact that back in 1976 he created the first multiplayer online game ever that I played and was addicted to, and then suddenly I got him as an employee in my game, a game which would have no idea that I was as big a fan of Roy Trubshaw as I am.
Once again, kind of unintentionally tugging on your nostalgia and your your dreams from childhood.
I also got John Romero, which I respect him, but I'm not a fan of his games. So I totally respect John Romero. He's an awesome guy, but I'm not a huge fan of his games. But Roy Trubshaw, man, when I got Roy Trubshaw on my team, I'm like, man, Roy Trubshaw, I'm going to sign him to do all the serious work, because he's the most amazing.
When he came in, was he leveled up already, or did you have to train him? Was he a scrub at first?
No, I had to level him up, which was the kind of sad thing, actually. He was not leveled up to the extent that Roy Trubshaw should be leveled up. And if Roy Trubshaw watches this video, you need to contact these developers and tell them they're selling you short.
He should always be maxed.
Exactly.
That's God.
Roy Trubshaw should be the system breaking.
That's the God mode code. You just type that in.
Exactly.
Type that in.
Roy Trubshaw comes in, and suddenly you have no problems, because he just does everything.
All games 10 out of 10. I'm probably gonna sneeze again.
Well,
but
I mean, Richard Bartle helped him to a certain extent, but Roy Trubshaw was the guy.
Sorry about that. You have any other positives for you, Zach?
No, I'm good.
I mean, well, the thing is, I'm not sure if that's because the game is pretty simplistic or if you didn't like the game for the most part. Not sure yet. Okay, well, trying to think. I don't have like a list in front of me, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to point out. I like the fact that they're still updating this game.
Yeah.
And they somewhat recently.
In fact, I will interrupt you right now, as I just did, and say that when I played this game, probably more than a year ago, is when I bought this game on a sale. Probably got it in a bundle or something. And I did play this game until the end before this. And when I played it, getting ready for this, there was more content than there used to be. So they are definitely adding to it and putting the latest trends into the end game.
Yeah, I think the most recent update was they added some. It's a harder mode for the game that adds pirating into it, so it affects your profits. But for those who are looking for more realistic simulation, that's obviously a huge problem for game devs. It's pirating. So, kudos to them for doing that, keeping it up.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else good we want to cover before moving on to?
Well, I mean, as far as to say, I think that it's an enjoyable game to a certain extent.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I
yeah.
Even before we get into the negative stuff, I think that overall the game is enjoyable, and I spent hours on it. I mean, if it was that boring, I wouldn't have kept playing. So, who's going first for negative stuff?
What do we usually do? Let's
You want me to go again?
Well, let's put it to you. Let's put it to you. Let's put it to you, Josh.
All right. So, with the simplicity of the game comes the fact, because you mentioned earlier about there was only like just a few upgrades till you get to like the best of the best office and stuff like that. And the fact that they're still updating gives me promise that this won't be an issue forever, but I feel like there should be more. I'm not really sure what an end game would be other than to retire on your own, in your mansion, like Notch did. But I just wish there was more to continue to expand and upgrade and eventually not become EA because you don't want to be evil twats, but be that large at least.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first negative.
Well, I mean, I think that what they're trying to do is make you become Valve.
Oh yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah.
Meaning you no longer make games and you just
yeah.
store.
I mean, you look at the research options, and it's basically like become Valve.
We've made 3 great games. Now,
any decade, we'll make another one.
Yeah.
We'll tantalize for the rest of our lives and never actually follow through. Valve is like the worst blue balls ever.
Yeah.
True.
No, I think I probably have Valve beat on the worst blue balls ever.
I'm not sure if I should delve into that, but I'm kind of curious though, Zach, since you kind of have this ominous like, nope, that's it, to the positive things, what your negatives may be.
Well, I might disappoint you here because, well, I mean, so I guess, you said this is a tycoon game. I guess that's a subcategory of just a simulation game.
Sim management, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what I do all day long. This kind of game doesn't really appeal to me. I'm looking for what you guys get out of it, but
I guess if you're doing it all the time, yeah, I guess it would kind of get old.
I mean, yeah, it's just my job to figure out what we're gonna spend our time on, and I don't know. I don't know. There were times when I found that to be, I guess, it felt like work, right?
Mhm.
And I guess one negative thing I'll say is that so I mean, this is I have had a very brief stint in the game development industry, and the thing there's lots of like really irritating stuff, and 80% of the work is just kind of not game development, at least when I was working on it.
Mm.
But uh, it, I don't know. The thing that keeps you going is like the creative bits. And so what they've done in this game is they've sort of distilled out the creative bits of
Yeah.
developing games, and they just left like the spreadsheets and the resource management.
So this might take things a little bit off track, like away from game dev, but to compare it, you know the game that came out this past year called House Flipper?
I can imagine the game. I don't know it.
I know of the game, and I don't.
So
I have no desire to play it, and I have not played it.
So if you don't know, House Flipper is exactly that. You are. It's. I don't want to say it's not fully developed, but it's really not like. It's not like a polished AAA game either. You know, it's hard to explain, but it's very popular. It's sold very well and still does. And you are just some guy. You're you, who buys these houses and cleans them and fixes them. Literally, you go into these houses, and initially you don't even buy the houses to make a profit. You just do like handyman work. So people email you, you go to answer these ads or these requests, and you go into their houses, and they're fucking filthy, disgusting, like roaches and crap smeared on the walls, and you clean them up like you would in a regular house. You sweep it, you wipe the windows, you empty trash, you fix things, and that's literally the game. And then you eventually buy houses, but you still have to go in and do the same thing with the houses. You decorate them afterwards so you can turn a profit and do it again and again and again. However, it's very, very popular, as I said. I even have it. I got a review copy of it, and I kind of enjoy it. And it has this weird calming... In my roundabout point is saying that it has this weird calming effect on me, and I think it's true for most people, to have this kind of zen. It's almost like a zen sandbox, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of doing it.
Yeah.
You know how like in like Buddhist monasteries they do chores to meditate, basically.
Right.
You know what I mean? They'll take care of the garden or whatever, and it's kind of that same kind of feeling. And I think that's kind of how these management games are concerned. There's a little bit more to it because there's a kind of a strategy or anything, something like that, where you're trying to like in Game Dev Tycoon specifically, there's you're trying to figure out the best combinations of genre and platform and audience, and eventually you open things up like marketing and all that sort of stuff. You're trying to figure out the best combination to get the best game out there, and so it's more than a Zen thing, but to kind of distill it down to what you're talking about, Zach, I think there is that Zen quality to it. However, like House Flipper, I'm wondering if someone who actually goes in and cleans and fixes houses plays House Fixer and is like, what the fuck is this shit? I hate this. I'm not getting paid for this. I'm just doing what I do without getting paid. So I'm wondering if, to kind of give you perspective on what other people see, but maybe, I kind of see where you're coming from as well.
Well, right. And my wife will watch any house flipping show that is on television. So like I understand that appeal, and I mean I'll watch them too. I mean, because you get to see see someone create something, and I guess you get to live that in this game, right?
Yeah. You get to see someone create something, and then shit all over it in your mind, and.
Well, when you watch it, it's like a holier than thou sort of thing. Like, I wouldn't do that with that house. Oh,
yeah, that does happen. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
but that's actually a really interesting point that you bring up, Josh, because this actually isn't something that I thought about before, but this game is too much in between a challenging game and a Zen game.
Mm-hmm.
too much right in between those two things. It's not a Zen game because you actually have to think about doing things and make decisions, but it's not a challenging game because the decisions are too fucking easy.
So it's kind of like they should have either chosen. What you're saying is they should have either chosen to be like an idle game, essentially, or a deeper management tycoon than what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I would love a game dev simulator, which is probably why I bought this game over a year before this Indie Fireside even happened.
Here's an interesting idea, and I don't know if Greenheart Games listens to this, if they would consider adding it, because it's kind of a big, huge thing to add in, or if someone would like to make a comparable game with this. Is what if you had the management part of Game Dev Tycoon, maybe add some deeper mechanics to it or whatever, but then to complete the simulation. And to kind of teach people, because there's games out there that teach people to code, kind of in a way. To complete the simulation, you have these like maybe mini games or little tasks where you actually have to code little bits of game.
See, I think that would interest me again, right? Because then at least you get to like stand back, even if it's just like a facsimile, just a hint of what you were going for.
But here's the thing about that.
Look at it and say, "Hey, I made something."
People these days hate hard games.
Damn kids, millennials.
I'm facing that right now with my games that are released. People are like, "Well, I like the narrative of your game, but I don't actually like the fact that I have to play a game."
You blame Gone Home for that. The walking sims. I think you were, when we were talking about on Indie Game Riot about the horror games that are like haunted houses and stuff like that. Basically, you were complaining about how like you don't have to. There's no challenge. You're just walking through and things go boo.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how walking sims and people seem to like expect this narrative game without a game.
Yeah, exactly what I was telling you before is like any game that calls itself a horror game is crap. I will guarantee you, I will promise you, any game that calls itself a horror game is crap. There are many games that have a horror theme that are good, but if a game calls itself a horror game, it's going to be crap because it's going to be walking through corridors with a light source, managing sanity while you avoid some creature.
New idea.
It's going to be the same fucking thing that has been done over and over and over and over again.
New idea. Game dev resource management, mini games where you have to code, but while you're doing it, you're walking through a haunted game dev office where a monster's chasing you and you have to manage your sanity. That's the resource you manage. You're welcome.
So let me, unless either of you have something else to say, I will tell you the biggest problem I have with this game.
Well, go ahead.
I just want to point out really quickly that Vance, you did actually write a game where you have to basically you're a writer and you have to manage your sanity.
Yeah, Novelist Simulator.
Oh yeah. I did, but you're not wandering through corridors with a light source.
That's true.
It's a simulation. Yeah. But and that game, of course, is for free, and it's not for everyone. It is absolutely not for everyone.
I think the other thing I was going to say was that I do think there could be some, even now after all the updates, I still think, because I feel like they have change some balance things with it, but I still think there could be some tweaks to the balancing, because there, especially when it comes to game reviews, I feel like they're a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Trivial? Is that the word? Not necessarily trivial, but you know what I mean, like where they're just kind of like, I don't know, this one's a 9 out of 5. And I know there are things that affect it, like the combination of...
Well, I mean, don't get me started on my problems with the game reviewing.
I guess in a way, because game reviews, like scoring game reviews, is kind of stupid in real life. But I think that there are things that affect it, because you have to get the right combination of things and stuff like that. But there's a lot of trial and error, which I personally don't like, at least not to that extent. And you can market things and you pay attention. There's ways. It's just that too many times I'm like in my logical human brain, I am thinking, okay, on Nintendo, some of the best games were action platformers, right? So like action, like Contra, or something like that. So I'm like, okay,
Contra was awesome.
So you know what I mean? Yeah, but everyone loved Contra. But then when you go to put action war, you know what I mean, or whatever, on like as that combination of genre and topic or whatever the hell it was called, it would be like, no, it was alright, it didn't really fit with the platform. I'm like, what the fuck you mean it didn't fit with the platform? I'm literally making Contra one of the best, most beloved games on the NES. And what are you talking about? You're giving me a 6 out of 10. Like what? That kind of thing. The logic.
This has a lot to do with what I was about to say too.
Okay, go ahead. I led you into that, so go. You can continue.
I think that I've thought a lot, actually, over the past month about how I would word this. I think these game developers...
Fuck them.
No, not fuck them. No, never fuck them. But I think these game developers made a game that seems like the game developers never made a game before. It's like they're
curious.
making...
I need to go look at their history. Hold on. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, it may be true. I don't know.
It's like they made a game about making games without perceivably any understanding about actually making games. I mean, obviously they do know about making games because they made a game, but at the same time, it's like when I play this game as a game developer, I feel like these people don't understand anything about game development.
So I'm looking at their history here. As a company, Game Dev Tycoon, unless they're not listing something, Game Dev Tycoon is their first game as a company. I'm not seeing. See, I'm looking at their personal bios now. You know, real passion. They worked in.
It feels like I'm playing a game by a 15-year-old kid who is trying to imagine what it would be like to be a game developer, but somehow a game developer made his game exactly as he laid it out, and it has nothing to do with actual game development. Do you know what I mean?
So they've since Game Dev Tycoon, they've added some people into the mix, but from what I can tell, at least the original people, they worked in software engineering. Like one guy, he did Windows mind mapping, and the other guy just worked a lot with C++ and some other .NET and things like that.
No, I have no doubt that they're competent programmers and developers. Obviously, they made this game,
but they did not.
Actually,
I'm not saying that they've. I'm not saying that they've actually designed a game though. they've never
That's what
actually
he's
designed
saying.
a
He's
game.
saying this is their first game.
Yeah.
Right. That actually kind of fits, right? I mean, this is their understanding of what the game development
Yeah.
sort of
So
arena looks
it's
like.
that's kind of meta. They went through the rigors of game dev as seen somewhat similar in the game, and they made a game about that. But yeah, as far as I can see, the game, it's the first company first game for the game company, and the first game for the founders at the very least. So that's kind of interesting that you mentioned that they've never made a game before. It seems like, because I don't think they have.
And I actually didn't even get to my point, and my main point is my big, enormous problem with this game is that you can't specialize.
Okay.
Because the thing about game development, especially indie game development, is that you have to specialize. You can't be everything all the time. But in this game, you have to be everything all the time.
Unless you're EA and massive.
Right.
Yeah. you start out as a guy in a basement or a garage or whatever it is, and then suddenly you have to be everything. You have to be a console developer, and it punishes you if you make games that are too similar.
Right.
But in reality,
Double Fine makes adventure games. That's their thing, right?
Yeah.
So.
No, Double Fine does not make adventure games, by the way.
Excuse me.
Double Fine made one adventure game. Did they make any more? People like Telltale. I'll use Telltale as an example, even though they went out of business.
I was gonna say they kind of prove your point that they got punished for making the same thing. Actually, it was more about resource management.
But Telltale made a lot of money when they existed, and I'll say actually even more to prove my point. JaShinYa Games or Greenheart Games or Kill Monday Games. Those are all obviously point-and-click adventure makers because that's what I know. But they make
frictional makes horror games.
They make only point-and-click adventure games all the time, and their fans want point-and-click adventure games. If they made another type of game, their fans would leave. That's what they do. And so this idea that Game Dev Tycoon portrays that you have to
diversify,
be everything all the time, is completely untrue. You can be Greenheart Games. You can be JaShinYa Games, right? Mm-hmm. You can be a specialist that makes the certain kinds of games, and everyone will flock to those games who likes those games. And if you make a different kind of game, those fans are going to leave. And all the other people aren't even going to know you exist. So you're going to fail.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I want to partially rebut that, although that's exactly what I was thinking when I was playing this. Was when I first starting out, I was like, okay, well, the first console came up, and I was like, I don't even want to touch consoles. I want to understand my current market, which is I'd pick PC instead of Commodore or whatever. And so it's like, I picked the right horse. I'm going to keep going on this. I'm going to specialize to this and build up my fan base. And so I just ignored consoles coming into this because it just seemed like not my I guess market. And it became clear to me fairly quickly that was a losing strategy, and that I needed it to be a broad spectrum game producer. and
Yeah.
that seemed unrealistic to me for the
Yeah,
same reason that it
very,
seemed
very
unrealistic to you.
unrealistic in the real game development market. That is incredibly unrealistic. Yes.
I do think too
So
that time kind of passed, and as far as like those fluctuations in popularity of various platforms, I think
yeah.
that time kind of passed too quickly.
Hmm.
Because I think the PC and the Commodore petered out really quickly, and all of a sudden the NES blew up out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, well, I was kind of
Well, I
focusing
mean,
on
the
this, like you
NES
said.
did kind of blow up out of nowhere
But I'm
Well,
in
saying like
history, but
but I
it
just want
only blew
to
up out of nowhere for a certain type of games.
sure.
NES didn't kill PC games
well, that's what yeah
because yeah.
yeah
Well,
it
okay, but I
didn't.
mean, so like the rebuttal here is that this game is about becoming like the biggest, best game producer, and in order to do that, you do have to be like a broad spectrum game producer. It's not about finding your niche and making a successful company that is eventually bought or shutters in 20 years or something, right? It's about
So so your
So I mean,
your argument is
so
that
look at Ken and Roberta Williams,
well
right?
right.
I want to clarify his
I
argument real quick.
wanted
Yeah,
His
go ahead.
argument is that even though you start off as a game developer, the main goal of the game is to be a producer or an owner of a company, not necessarily just a developer, and therefore, as a company, you have to diversify. Is that what you're saying?
That is my point.
Okay.
Yes, that the goal of the game, the winning state of the game, is to not be what
yeah.
maybe what Vance or maybe what many of us would like to be, which is to be experts and skilled
Well,
craftsmen at
yeah,
particular
yeah.
genre, right?
And I say that's a problem because you don't have multiple paths to success in this game. You have one path to success, and that is diversification. You have to diversify, and you have to jump on whatever the latest trend is,
Yeah, absolutely.
and that's the only way to really succeed in this game. And that's not completely true because I played this game 5 times all the way to the end. And one of those times I stuck with PC the entire time, and I still succeeded, although I had a lot less money than I did.
I think because PC tech, and just like in real life, PC hangs around and still makes money, uh, whereas the consoles kind of ebb and flow and come and go, and you kind of have to switch with that. So I think that's a valid strategy in the game, is to just kind of stick with the PC.
But it's hard. It's hard.
Just probably
if you want
draws
to
it
stick
out.
with PC. Yeah, it's hard.
Uh,
But I mean,
yeah, I think
so.
the balancing
think-
and yeah.
Okay.
I
I was
to
going to
round
go
it
on
out.
to something different, but
Oh, go ahead.
so I'm talking about. I want to go on to the end game. The researching, becoming Valve, and what
I feel like
does this game offer beyond its 8 hours of playtime, 7 to 8 hours of playtime to get to the end? Then what is there?
well
Does it have anything?
we were talking earlier about how it's kind of like how meta it was that it was their first game, and they're talking about making your first game and becoming this large company. And it feels like the more and more we talk about it, that they've just projected themselves into this game, and like that their dream is to become Valve someday is what it seems like. You know, that's why the end goal is kind of aimed towards that sort of thing. And I mentioned that earlier about how the content, I feel like, should be more expansive as you go on, instead of just kind of end at that third tier. To kind of, you know, hang my hat on your clothes rack. You know, in the same way that where is the reward? Well, I don't think there really is one after you. I mean, like, yay, I did it, and that's it. I feel like there should be a way to continue. And again, I don't know. Jesus, guinea pigs. There should be a way to have the end goal of like retiring to a mansion or an island or something like that. Maybe not something necessarily that stupid, but you know what I mean. There should be something.
Yeah, there should be something that you can achieve.
Maybe a Hall of Fame.
At the end, I felt like I was basically doing nothing. I had Roy Trubshaw and Don Romero
that was
on
your
my
end game.
team, but I was and I was the third tier office space, and I had a research team, and I just didn't care anymore.
Maybe this game is more real than you think.
Yeah.
I've got it all, and I just don't care anymore.
Or just in any field, the more success you have, the less you do what you love.
Wolf of Wall Street.
It just goes that way, man.
It's the Wolf of Wall Street simulator. It comes with like accessories of like cocaine that you can snort as you're playing.
Well, see, if it had cocaine, then I'd be in it.
This fucking game's great, man.
If there was cocaine, then I would be in it.
I've been playing this shit for days. I mean, I think as we've discovered, probably the biggest issue is that whole. I think balance can be the general term for it of the game, and it's not necessarily unbalanced where it's like too easy or too hard, but because, like you said, it maybe should have picked a direction, but unbalanced in the sense that there's not quite enough of like everything that they put into the game. Mm-hmm. Although what they did put in the game, I think they did well. With like as far as
I think they did it.
I
so here comes back to what was the first thing they said. They basically made this game for nostalgia. Anyone who was born before 1985 will love this game to a certain extent because of the nostalgia.
I don't think it's for nostalgia. I think it was more for. I think it was, as we've talked about. I think we've discovered that it was more of them projecting themselves into the game, and I think it was more for the passion of the work rather than nostalgia. I think nostalgia was secondary. I think it was just a byproduct.
No, I actually disagree with that. I think nostalgia was the primary thing that happened because of all the times that every single new console, every single new computer release was broadcasted to you. It was like you're going through history. Basically, this game was like going through history. Like, okay, I'm going to start back in history, and then I'm going to go through history. So I actually disagree that nostalgia was not the primary aim. It, to me, seemed like the primary aim.
I'm gonna agree with Josh on this. That I think the easiest way to build an accurate model of industry is to just copy what actually happened. I think they just took the laziest approach they could, which was do what actually happened. Consoles came up quickly, or they disappeared quickly.
Well, that's the thing, is that the laziest approach they could. Why? I mean, is it that hard to build an actual economic system?
Yeah.
It actually is. Yeah, but that would have been a much better game, and it's actually not that much harder because I fucking did it 2 years ago. I mean, I'm still fucking I still didn't
it's hard
fucking
to
release my game, but
it's hard to have a simulation which is going to predict like a Japanese businessman coming up with the idea of releasing a console or something. I mean, those sort of surprise occurrences are very hard.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the excitement of building an economic system.
Would you have been more happy about it if it was like randomly?
Not random.
Replayability or
no, not random. I'm not talking about random. I'm talking about. Well, okay. I'm talking about maybe random starting conditions. Random starting conditions, and then
the
you have
RimWorld
to
of game development.
adapt to what's going on that came from those random starting conditions.
New idea. Game development simulator, where you have to game code in many. Where you have to game. Where you have to add code in as mini game. You have to survive through the night in this haunted game dev office, surviving a monster, maintaining your sanity, and it's RimWorld conditions where you start off with random resources, and you have to adapt to the things that happen.
There's like a dwarf fortress portion where it builds up for millennia,
and you have to get off the planet with a spaceship.
I mean, why not
That's the end
do a
game.
dwarf fortress? I mean, like a dumbed down dwarf fortress sort of thing going on, where you have a random starting condition, and then you have random consoles that come out. I mean, not random, but I mean the consoles are developed based on those starting conditions, and who is developing them. So you.
Do you want more of like a supply and demand kind of system involved?
Yeah. So I mean, when you start the game, you randomly generate a large set of conditions that exist. And as time goes on, those conditions create environments that you have to react to.
I think that's kind of a cool idea, actually. Now, talking about it is the whole supply and demand aspect of it, because that would create more variation to the game and replayability, as Zach was saying. So that would be kind of a cool thing, yeah.
I mean, that's what it buys you, though, is maybe ability. But then you lose your nostalgia walk through history.
Like I said,
that's exactly why I said before that this game is based on nostalgia, not based on.
I still think that as a design decision, I think it was like this is easier to do. Let's do that.
I think it was based on passion. I still think nostalgia was a byproduct of them putting themselves in and putting their passion.
I guarantee 100% that every one of these developers is in their 40s and
wait, that's actually easily verifiable, but okay.
Well, I actually did not verify it, but I will guarantee you that every single one of these developers is in their 40s, and they missed the times when they were growing up in the 80s and 90s, and maybe early 2000s, because no one fucking misses the 2000s.
The founders...
The 2000s were the fucking hell of games.
If I were to guess, I would say the founders are in their 30s. I just looking at the pictures, but go on.
If you looked at me, what would you say?
I think you would be around my age, like 30 or early 30s.
Yeah, that's not true.
I know you're older than me, but I'm just what I'm saying. But you don't look that old.
So that's what I'm saying.
I'm just saying based off
I'm in my 40s, my friend.
I'm just saying based on what information I have, that's what I would go with. But I understand your point.
Yeah.
That's agree to disagree, I think, on that. You may be right. Maybe if they are listening to this, they can clarify in the comments with the rest of the plebes. Or they can email us.
What's up, plebes?
Yeah. Or they can email us. I gave you your own email, right, Vance? I think I did.
Yeah.
Vance at indiegamerion.com.
Yeah,
you should go email him there. if you'd like
Yeah.
to clarify and
Yeah.
curse them out.
Yeah, actually, about a
Send me
month
your
or two
tits.
ago,
Send
we
me
got
your
a
tits.
about a month or two ago, we got an email from the author of Icarus. So that was pretty cool, actually.
I did.
Yeah,
Wait,
no,
I didn't hear
I
about
got
this.
that. I got
Yeah,
that
actually,
email.
forward
Yeah.
that over to Josh.
Did-
Yeah,
Now, did you not get that?
No.
yeah, I forwarded it to you, Vance. You should forward it over to Josh if you still have
No,
it.
I'll forward it over to Josh. Yeah.
I run this shtick and no one emails this shit to me.
Yeah.
That's cool. Was it good stuff or bad?
It just
No, it was good.
answering questions that came up in the.
You know what
Yeah,
we should do?
he fucking watched the whole video. Yeah.
You know what we should do is as we collect these responses from devs, I feel like we should do like quick revisits, like an episode dedicated to revisits. We're getting a little meta here, but we should do like an episode dedicated to revisits of games that we've covered previously. That'd be kind of interesting. Just kind of go over some stuff, especially if the game devs have contacted us to clarify things. Is there anything else that we want to talk about for negative or positive? Or are we?
I would say, in closing, this is a game.
I feel like you should have a
that
gavel.
Probably has a few hours of good gameplay. Do not buy it at full price.
Pirate it like they. No, I'm just kidding. Don't go down that. But I don't think it's that expensive. I mean, you can actually get it on. I don't know if there's any limitations on mobile, but they do have it available for mobile, and it's generally cheaper on mobile.
Mhm.
Just say. So I mean, there's an option.
It actually kind of feels more like a mobile game. So.
Yeah, it feels like a mobile game, but I don't play mobile games, so
And
I don't know what the fuck's going on with them.
And by the way, if anyone's interested, they are currently making a new Tycoon simulator management game called Tavern Keeper. If you want to keep an eye out, so if you do enjoy it,
I'm keeping an eye on that one. I have been for a while, so
it looks interesting. And I think if they learn from Game Dev Tycoon, and the aesthetic in this one's like really cool too. But if they learn from Game Dev Tycoon, this could be really really good. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it then. Sweet.
Right.
You wanna close it out there?
Well, this has been Indie Fireside. We have been talking about Game Dev Tycoon.
There you go.
Yes. Wait. This has been Indie Fireside. We have been talking about Game Dev Tycoon. Tune in next month, and we will talk about a different game.
On WKYZ. Actually, we already have the next game announced. If you want to announce it real quick, because of how we got behind.
We do,
Yeah.
but I have to bring up Discord in order to do that.
I was gonna do it, but if I do that, thanks, possibly troll account. But if you're not, thanks anyway. So yeah, if I would bring it up myself, but it would mess up the cameras.
Wait, he didn't put it in Indie Fireside.
Or it hasn't been announced yet.
The Void.
Yes.
This looks like a really interesting game, actually. I'm looking forward to playing this game.
And Ian should be joining you for that, I believe, unless something comes up with his
This
classes.
game is called The Void by Ice Watch.
There you go. So The Void coming up next month. Or actually this month, technically. Since it goes from the 1st to whatever, everyone can have the chance to play it. So I think it's $9.99, I believe. So
Yeah, it's $9.99. Yeah.
everyone play it, and then you can join us in
So pick
the
it up for
conversation.
$9.99 and come into the chat and discuss it with us, motherfucker!
And that's Indie Fireside.